So why did you help me just now?
Well, a woman without coffee is a dangerous woman.
In last week's For All Mankind episode, we watched as hardliners took power in the Soviet government through a coup. And this week, we watched the ripples of that spread millions of miles away to Mars. In hindsight, it did seem a little too good to be true. All that cooperation in a post-Cold War world. And as Ed and Danielle find out in this episode, they're definitely not past all of that BS. The tensions come into focus in an argument between Svetlana and a brand new character named Vasily. He favors Korzhenko's new government, which he believes will take them back to a time when the world lived in fear of the Soviet Union's might. He talks about a return to the ideals of Lenin and Stalin, and she's more in line with Gorbachev's policies. But we'll find out later there's more to it, that it's about more than just ideology. For now, what's important is that he keeps pushing her buttons, and as things get heated, she shoves him, and when he falls, his suit is punctured, which is not what you want to have happen when you're on the surface of Mars. It is a planet, so it's not like the moon where you're basically in hard vacuum. There's an atmosphere, but the atmospheric pressure is much lower than Earth's, and it's only a fraction of what you need in order to be out there without a pressure suit. So his suit rapidly losing pressure is a crisis, and something Svetlana will have to answer for. And Danielle makes this clear whenever she gets the report from Ed. Galkin has the bends, and he's confined to a hyperbaric chamber where he'll have to stay for a few days before they'll even know if he has any permanent damage. Danielle decides to pull Svetlana's flight status because there has to be some kind of consequences, and unsurprisingly, Ed objects. Danny sees this as a part of a bigger problem that's been brewing after what happened in Moscow, and she's probably making the right decision, although it turns out to be irrelevant either way. When they call her in, Svetlana tells them that she's been recalled to Moscow to stand trial for assault and crimes against the patriot of the Soviet Union. This doesn't sound great, and it doesn't really make sense until she explains that Vasily's family is connected to the new regime. That changes everything, and Danny appeals to NASA to intervene given the reports of political retribution under the new government. Will is there to back her up. He doesn't want to see a valued cosmonaut get shipped to a gulag. And while Hobson is sympathetic, their hands are tied by the M7 Charter Agreement, which says that any member can recall their people if they deem it necessary. This is what Irina uses when she goes head-to-head with Hobson, and when he tries to put his foot down and say the US won't comply with the transfer, she threatens to pull the USSR out of the M7 completely. Margaret Reynolds shows up for her first day of work at Star City and sits in on a meeting where Irina brings up the situation on Mars. We did get a little more background about the new head of Roscosmos when NASA was discussing its next steps. She's been in the security and surveillance apparatus at Star City since 1969. She's from an elite family in Moscow and seemed to have fallen out of favor with the Gorbachev regime, as did much of the KGB. That's why she backed Korzhenko, and now that he's in power, she's settling scores at Roscosmos and Happy Valley. We get a taste of that in the meeting when one of the engineers suggests it might make more sense to leave Svetlana in her post so they can get the asteroid mining project going again. This puts him on Irina's wrong side, which she immediately makes clear. She also says they need to know if they can trust the Americans, and the mining program is on hold until they figure out what went wrong on the Kronos mission. When they hand out the reports, she tells the assistant to give one to Margo, and when there aren't enough copies, she says to give her the guy who pissed her off's copy. Margo puts in a long day poring over the documents, and after midnight, when she goes to get a cup of coffee, she meets another engineer who's working late. She helps her solve the problem of getting coffee, and Margo returns the favor by helping her with what she's working on. Her name is Tatiana, and she explains that they've all been given orders to sort of keep their distance from Margo. But you can see there's obvious respect and curiosity coming through, and it feels like Margo might have found her Russian Aleda. Ilya. To increase the pressure for Svetlana's return, the Soviets start to convert systems back to their original Soviet parameters. And when Danielle tries to get to the bottom of it, they tell her Roscosmos no longer recognizes her role as commander. Hobson gets reamed out by President Gore, who tells him to handle the situation. And he brings up his speech saying the Cold War was over and how his opponents can't be able to use that against him in the next election. We check in with Miles and Ilya, who have a boost in income now that the North Korean market has opened up. There is a brief mention of Lee's special request, which I'm still not sure where they're going with that, but here it serves as an opening for Miles to pitch his new idea. It turns out that he sent a Mars rock that Sam found back to his daughter, and when she was out at the mall with his wife, a jeweler saw it and bought it on the spot for $5,000. Miles wants to expand their operation, which makes sense from his perspective, but Ilya doesn't want to complicate things and increase their risk, which also makes sense from his perspective. What also makes sense, even if it's a little more discouraging, is Sam's and the other workers' reactions to what they think is happening with Svetlana in the wake of Vasily's injury. Since it looks like she's walking around free with no consequences, and they've heard stories that Vasily is brain dead, it looks like more evidence of the class divide, and they're getting riled up about it. Miles picks a bad time to ask Sam if she'll help him get more rocks, and that leads to them having an argument. His point is that the best thing they can do about the situation is to get theirs by not following Helios's rules, while she seems more interested in justice. He's bribed the suit supervisor so he could skip the line and get access to a pressure suit, but he'll have to walk because she won't help him out by getting a rover. He does go, and while he's getting his suit, Deb is on TV talking about how he's going to bring Helios back to what it used to be. There's a brief back and forth with the suit soup that ends with Miles being disappointed that he got one of the old bulky suits. This is interesting though because things go wrong as you would imagine, and when he falls, the suit's durability is probably what saves him from ending up like Vasily. This made me rethink the whole situation because initially I thought it was kind of convenient that the first suit rips so easily. But now I'm wondering if it's just a matter of Helios cutting corners under Richard's leadership. It's not terribly surprising that Miles ends up stuck in a ditch chasing after these rocks, which were just sitting around on the surface waiting for someone to pick them up. But it's also a pretty straightforward reference to the larger gold rush in space that is the asteroid project. Sam goes to confront Commander Poole about the Svetlana situation. She mostly brushes her off because of the way that she came at her, but she picks up on the sentiment coming from downstairs. So she goes to check on Vasily in the hyperbaric chamber and doesn't get terrible news from the Mars 94 doctor. It seems like he'll probably recover. Richie comes to Sam looking for Miles and they realize he never made it back. So she hops in the rover and tracks him down, and beyond a busted radio and a pretty nasty gash on his arm, he's fine. After she patches him up, they share a look that appears to carry more weight than Sam was expecting. There's something going on there. And back in Russia, Margo's hard work pays off when she discovers the real reason the Kronos mission failed. She takes her findings, which indicate there was an internal cover-up to Irina. She calls in the engineer who wrote the report, who, by the way, was the same person that turned Margo away when she came to Star City after the accident, and asks him to explain. Surely he figured out the same thing Margo did, and he didn't put that in the report. He does explain, and he takes responsibility, and she walks him out. It's a tough spot for Margo to be in, but as she mentioned, the US would have found the same problem when they looked over the report anyway. When they walk out of the office and Margo is alone, she notices Svetlana's folder sitting on Irina's desk. But it's in Russian, so I couldn't make out anything that she would have saw except for her birthday, height, and weight. When she returns, Irina tells Margo she did a service to the Soviet Union and to her personally. As a reward, she gives her a photograph of Sergei and his colleagues in 1969. She reveals that he was a close friend of hers and they worked together for a long time. And she also tells Margo that the Americans took her for granted and that she won't make the same mistake, and assures her that the work they'll do together will take them far into the cosmos. Once again, Wrenn Schmidt does a fantastic job of expressing how that works on Margo, how she's genuinely happy to hear it, but also the dread that's a part of that package. Since she just watched another employee, another good engineer, walked out of the room knowing that he might just disappear over what she exposed. This is confirmed when she sees Tatiana crying in the cafeteria later. She tells her that the KGB took him, and after a brief bit of denial and a reminder that Irina is KGB, she knows it's true. Later in the meeting room, she stares at his empty chair and thinks about where her life choices have taken her. After cursing at his exercise bike, Eli laments his current situation with his wife. She starts talking about some of the trips they'll take in retirement, and when she brings up India, he gets an idea and tells her he has to go back to work right away. The idea is to use India, the one neutral country in the alliance, for Svetlana's trial. This will essentially solve all of their problems, and both Gore and Korzhenko have signed off on it. Ed doesn't like it because of his feelings for Svetlana and tries to get Danny to refuse to go along with it. When she doesn't back down, he tries to make it personal about her, and she turns that right around and starts talking about him. She points out that time and time again he makes exceptions for people he cares about. She's not wrong, and she lays out the examples, and that takes them to the verge of revealing what really happened to Danny Stevens. They don't quite get there though, but she did stop what she was saying on the word he, as in he did something. Not when something happened, or not when we did something, which I don't know. That just makes the idea of him killing himself even more likely. They're not giving us a direct answer yet though, so we'll have to wait and see. Ed and Danny's argument ends when she tells him that Svetlana will be on Unity when it leaves. He goes to see her in a room and half-heartedly pitches an idea to hide her down in the sub-basement until it all blows over. And then they share a moment and a kiss, and he walks her out as Cat Powers Maybe Not plays, and they say goodbye. Ed sheds a tear, and then the episode ends as he walks past Danny without saying a word. This was another jam-packed episode where I was slightly more caught up in what was happening to Margo over what was happening on Mars. But at the same time, I mellowed out on most of what I didn't particularly like there on first watch. I mentioned my turnaround on the punctured suit, and I liked the Danny and Ed stuff throughout. I think it just comes down to liking characters or wanting to like them, and then seeing them do things you know are going to be mistakes. It can be frustrating, but in the end, that is what makes the big dramatic moments land down the road. And I have to admit to being a little surprised about how well that worked for Svetlana and Ed's last sequence together. She was essentially an unknown character until last week, and her exit really felt like someone that would be missed. But never fear, because Irina is here to fill that void. She's a character that's scary in the most exciting way, and she appears to be Margo's equal, which is a plus considering conflict is built into that situation. The twists and turns continue to deliver some surprises. Going into the season, I was expecting an expansion of the space programs, with less friction between the superpowers, and now I'm thinking there's a good chance that the USSR will fall before the season's over. Things are messy, and that does feel accurate, and I think that's a good place to leave things. Please like this video if you enjoyed it. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and thanks for watching. I'll talk to you soon.